Well, another thing that you need to learn about that could be a physical stigma is underground storage tanks. This happens not only in residential but commercial. If you want to have a real learning experience, sell a gas station someday. Oh, it may have been an antique store for the last 20 years, but if those storage tanks are still underground, something's going to have to be dealt with on this. You're going to learn about things like a super fund. Man, I met one agent that has carved out a whole industry for himself. He sells convenience stores to other people. Can you imagine of all the environmental issues that can come up with those underground gas tanks that are there? There are segments of our city that are on city water and city sewer and have been for years. But there's still an old underground septic tank there that nobody filled in properly. It could be a danger that somebody could get into that situation. Well, if you know about the underground storage tanks, pass it on. It wouldn't hurt to ask those kinds of questions about it, especially if you're doing commercial real estate, because a lot of times things have been done underground on property. Oh, it may be one type of business now, but it may have been something earlier that had underground storage tanks. Now, two other things we need to think about. They may not be physical stigmas, but they're going to be something physically you need to think about is wells and septics. For those of you that have never practiced rural real estate, there are two holes out in the yard. One is where the family's going to get their drinking water, and the other one is where they flush things away they never want to see again. It sure would be nice if those two things were not connected with each other underground somehow or another. How can you make sure that this is going to be okay? The state has requirements about the distance between wells and septics. The county cannot make the distance less restrictive, but they can make it more restrictive. The state may say it's only 50 feet between a well and the septic. The county might decide they want 100 feet between the well and the septic. The problem you have is the rules may differ from county to county. So as you go to one county to show property, find out what their rules are, and then as you go to the adjacent county, you're going to find out what their rules are in terms of distance. Some lenders have now required a test of the water that's in the well, and also they require the septic tank to be pumped dry and some county inspector to look in there to make sure it's not cracked or full of roots. And that would be something else that maybe you've never experienced before. You may never not even know where to get water tested. So it would be a good idea to start gaining that information before you actually have the opportunity to do that. My idea is that you ought to stop for about 30 minutes each week, and you ought to ask yourself the question, what could come up in a real estate transaction that I've never experienced before? Now, where can I get some education on that kind of experience? Then you'd be in a better place. Now let's talk about something else that some people aren't going to like about a property, and that is noise. There are some properties, they are located right up against a freeway, highway, expressway, or whatever you want to call them, and the traffic noise is just unbelievable. And if the house is older, it's probably built in such a way the noise comes right into the house. There are some people that will not buy that property because of all of that noise. Some people, you can't hear it in the house, but you can in the yard, and they enjoy being in their yard, and they won't be interested in that noise either. Now, you want to talk about noise, what about selling a property near an airport? There have been a lot of things that have gone back and forth with different cities and the airports nearby. In some cases, the city, the airport, or somebody has paid for houses to be more well insulated than they were in the past. Imagine showing a property to someone where there's not a plane going over, but then when the wind changes, suddenly there is. What if the wind changes after the closing, not before? Those people are going to be a little concerned. Think about this. Before somebody makes an offer on a property like that, talk to them about going to the property several different times at different times of the day. And just rolling down the car windows and listening, watching the setting sun, getting a feel for the noise in the area before they make an offer on the property. That's about the best that you could possibly do. Now, we also have a law that has been passed recently. If you sell a residence that is within 1 mile of a commercial operation, you need to let those people know about the noise that could come from that property. I don't think there is a residence that is over a mile away from anything in our city, so I would have to do a disclosure, but mostly the commercial operations we have are retail or light industrial, so it's not a major problem. But there are some factories and manufacturing plants that may fall into that category, so let's look at the rule one more time. You sell a residence within 1 mile of a commercial operation. Let that buyer know, and they can decide whether they want the property or not. That's a physical stigma as far as most people are concerned. Well, what should the licensee watch for when they're looking at a property? In many cases, I go into a property and I'm showing it to the buyer. This is the first time I've ever been in there because it's not our company listing anyway. This is especially a list that you need to think about if a tornado or a hurricane has come through recently. You need to start looking more closely at properties than you ever have before. Now, in the old days of real estate, I didn't care. I expected the seller to do a disclosure. I can't always feel that the seller is going to do all the disclosures they need to. In your area, the newspaper has articles about floods that have taken place. And just when you think you've got it all figured out where floods can happen, the city will come out and redirect some dirt to try to keep an area from flooding, and they cause a whole new area to flood that never flooded before. You need to keep all of those articles about tornadoes, hurricanes, and floods so that you can inform people as completely as possible if they want to buy in your area. Now, when you're out on the property, look for a cracked foundation. I went into one house with a real estate agent. When he got inside the house, he stretched out his arms like they were airplane wings. He slid his feet across the floor. I said, "What are you doing?" Because I thought he was about to take off. He says, "I'm looking for a cracked foundation." He walked to every kitchen cabinet, opened it and closed it. He opened every door and closed it to see if they were sticking. I said, "You know, that's really the home inspector's job." He says, "I think it's my job." And now that I've been in real estate a little longer, I'm convinced that would be a better place to be. I don't know for sure if it has a cracked foundation, but as I slide my feet across the floor, if I feel something that's a little lumpy, bumpy, or something that doesn't feel quite right, then I'm going to say to the buyer, this property may have a foundation problem. If you're concerned about it, let's get an expert out here to tell you what it'll take to get it fixed. I'm also going to look at the seller's disclosure notice to see what it says about a foundation. That's going to be important for me to pass on to that buyer as well. Now, after a storm has come through, you need to start looking at property more closely than you ever have, not at the improvements, but the ground itself. Dirt could have been washed away and it would be obvious to you that that has taken place. Or new dirt could have been brought in and placed in the yard that wasn't there before. It may be that there was such poor drainage on the property that a lot of that water has backed up and at least gotten under the house and maybe into the house. So you need to kind of look at the ground and get a good feel for that. I talked to one young man. He was so upset. He had sold his townhouse. During the time that he owned the townhouse, there were several times when it rained, the water would just pile up against his house and seep into the house itself and cover the floor. He hired some people and they redirected the dirt and they dug around and they thought it would never happen anymore. So he sold the property to an attorney. And when the attorney got in there, the first time it rained, water came into the house. When he talked to the neighbors about it, they said, "You know what? The guy that sold it to you had that same problem." The attorney sued the young man, did it successfully, and the young man had to give back all of the money that he had received for that property. And now the attorney used that money to redirect the dirt so that he wouldn't have a drainage problem again. Somehow that young man did not realize you should go ahead and do that disclosure even if you think the problem is fixed. Now, if I'd gone out there and seen some digging around there, I would have asked the young man, "Well, what is this? What went on here? Were they working on your foundation? Did we have some flooding? Was there some drainage?" Those are the kind of things you look for. Now, another thing you look for is on waterfront properties. You need to think about the possibility that that water can get out of its banks from time to time. Around some lakes, they have an elevation point. And the people that live there are not supposed to build anything below that elevation point because that has been determined. That's how high the water could get someday. I've even seen water get past the elevation point. In one house that I was looking at, talking about listing it, I said, how close has the water gotten to your house? Well, they said one time it got 3 feet away from the house. Later on that year, we had a bigger rain. Luckily, I didn't get the listing, and that rain got water all the way into the house. I've actually had listings in the past that the house flooded and it picked the house up off of the foundation and moved it back down the road about 30 feet and set it back down on the ground. These are all things that are possible that we could get ourselves into difficulty if we just don't pay closer to attention to when we're looking at a property. Well, let's talk about cracks. I was driving down one street, 5 houses had brand new driveways. I thought, that's kind of interesting. I got down to the house that I was headed towards. It was the 5th house that had the new driveway. I said, how'd you get a new driveway? They said, well, we decided we had a foundation problem. We complained to the builder about it. 4 other people had complained as well. They paid to move all of us into an apartment, and we stayed in the apartment for 3 months while they dug underneath our house, raised our 2-story house off of the ground, and then dug out the old foundation and put in a new one and put the house back down on the new foundation. I said, did you get a warranty with that? They said, it's a lifetime warranty. I said, is it transferable? Yes, we can transfer it to whoever we sell the house to. Well, I wasn't lucky enough to sell that property, but if I was a buyer, even if I could get a lifetime warranty on that, I would be a little concerned if the foundation cracked once, maybe it could happen a second time as well. Now, another thing that you may not have thought about when you go out and look at properties is you may see a property that has a retaining wall. This also is a possible danger. The retaining wall was put there to hold dirt in its place. What if that dirt gets too heavy? What if it rains and now that mud gets even heavier than the dirt was? The retaining wall could give way and things could slide down. In a lot of cases, that retaining wall is holding something specific in place. In some cases, it's a patio. In others, it's a swimming pool. In some cases, it's a drain field for a septic tank. You need to know why the retaining wall is there. You need to inspect it to see if you think it has a problem. And you need to let the buyer know that is always a potential problem. And if they're concerned about it, they ought to have somebody come out and take a look at the property and let them know whether this is going to be a safe situation or not. In many cases, the home inspector can give you a general idea, but you may need a structural engineer to make it more complete. Now, another thing that could be wrong with the property is the roof of the property. I have never gone up on a roof on any of my listings, but I have done this. I've looked at it from the ground. I've asked the sellers if they knew when that roof was put on there. I asked them whether it was put over existing shingles or they took the old shingles off. I want as much information about that roof as possible, and I've had a few times that the buyers negotiated a new roof in the closing itself so that they made sure that they got a new roof on that property before they would be willing to close on that property. I'm not a roofing expert, but I can find a roofer without too much difficulty. The problem you have with roofers is there's a wide range of skills and talents, and there's a wide range of them showing up when they say they're going to show up. So you need to try to have a list of roofers that you're comfortable with as part of that list of people that could possibly provide work at your office. Now, another thing you need to look at while you're out at the property is windows. Some windows have cracks. Some windows have broken panes. Some windows in older houses can't even open anymore because of the settling on the house. Some houses have single pane windows, and most people expect to see double pane windows these days. Some houses have double pane windows and then weather windows on top of that. That house is probably going to be a little bit more consistent in its energy bills if it has all 3 of those. But this is another thing that you're going to look at while you're out on the property. Are you getting the idea that basically you're going to look at everything that's on the seller's disclosure notice and you're going to get a good feel what's good, what's bad, and you're going to make lots of notes, talk to the sellers about it, talk to the buyers about it, so that the buyers are fully informed? Sure, you can do that. Another thing you need to take a look at is the flashing that's up on the roof.